Okay, welcome everyone. So tonight we're going to be reading from a Pathwork lecture called Responding to the Call of Life 145. And I'm aware I usually have the date when it was originally received, and I don't have that up. Does anybody know? Can search really quickly just to kind of look at. I always find it interesting um, when these lectures were originally came in. So, and tonight we have a special treat. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Judy.
September 9, 1966.
Okay. Wow. Okay. So, and tonight we have a special presentation of the lecture rather than just, from the various sources online and everything. This is a special PDF that was created with some very nice breaking up of the lecture, as well as some nice pictures and illustrations that help us, kind of work through the guides. Sometimes the lectures are so dense, and there's like, it seems like they keep adding to the understanding, and sometimes it feels like I almost get lost in the maze of the lectures. So it's on one level just fun to follow the maze wherever it leads and connect with it that way, but also to have it sort of outlined in a way can be really useful. So we'll see how this works for everybody, and much gratitude to Brian Stokes. So I'm going to just go ahead and do what I usually do, which is to just sort of read some of it and then pause, make my own comments, welcome other people's comments or questions. So, and we'll just, feel free to interrupt if you feel like I'm, going too far past, something that you wanted to bring to everybody's awareness. So, the guide says, as long as we identify mostly with our ego self and ignore the other parts of ourself, we remain trapped in a painful struggle that tears us apart and where we don't see any solution. And this is a kind of unbearable tension and anxiety inside of us that can be overshadowed, and we do all the time with all sorts of pursuits and, attempts to, remedy or prove or fix or whatever, basically. And he says,
Can I
even
stop
though.
you, Darlene, and ask a question already?
Go ahead. Yes.
First paragraph, and I'm already in.
Uh-huh.
I'm sure that there are many places where the guide defines ego, but I get lost in the terms.
Yeah.
Can you help me with this?
Yeah, I'll do the best I can. I mean, that term is used in lots of different other systems, right? And how the guide uses it. And then the guide himself uses language in a very different way. Like he kind of does not like strict definitions, because he likes to play with the word meanings and, kind of point us to different aspects of something, often with different words. So sometimes he uses words, like different words for the same thing, right? And so, but in this case, I think, right, he's talking here more about just what we commonly identify. Like if we think all we are is just our personality, right? And then we're trying to fix our personality or improve our personality or make our personality be so that people approve of us or like us or whatever. It's like there's a way in which, I think that's what he's pointing to, is kind of this painful struggle. And when we don't know the larger parts of ourselves now, that may include our lower self or whatever, but it also, I think in some ways he's pointing there when we don't know our source and our higher resources, right, is how I read into that. He doesn't say that directly, but so it feels to me like when we just see ourselves as like like this little self, then and then that little self is sort of split in two, right? And so that's all that happens, is this painful struggle between those two. And so that's why, in the work that we're doing, we're trying to also awaken sort of this greater self in various ways, right? Does that help?
Yeah, it does. I think putting it in that terms is pretty clear. I think I get it. Thank you.
And again, that's kind of my reading into it. So, we can have differences here. That's fine. But, when he talks about this unbearable tension and anxiety, I think that's often in us. It's kind of coming from this inner, conflict that we really can't relieve, because it's based on the image, and the image has got us split into two. And so until we can kind of step outside of that and observe and see from a larger perspective, we're just kind of torn between. And then we can't relieve the basic fear or the sense of meaninglessness and waste. And he says, only when you find and activate your center deep within yourself can you fulfill your destiny, your reason for existing. Then and only then you will find a genuine security and peace coming from within. And to find it, you must release your hold on the outer ego. Instead of trusting the ego exclusively, use it as a tool to activate the universal self slumbering within.
And the universal self is not just the higher self. It's all of us. Or is
Yeah,
it the higher self?
yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, it's kind of like this is where, it's like, okay, the God self, right? But the God self within, right? Which is that spark of that larger God self within each of us. So finding our own, the goal is sort of to recognize that that's really who we are, and activate that to live through us, right? It's like in some ways we can see, that we're all channels, right? And through our lives we're channeling various aspects of ourselves, into the world. And one of the things that we really want to do is channel our, both our higher self, but like it's connected with that universal self, because it's like there's a unification. So this may get too esoteric. So but again, there's something more in us, with us, in life, as life, there's just more than what we ordinarily think. And so part of what we're trying to do is remember this, and sort of awaken our sensitivity out of anesthesia, right? To recognize that it's here. It's a direct experience. So, and again, see, many of you know this, but to understand it theoretically and to live it are two different things. And we've talked about this some before, right? To really embody this, right? We have to know it on the spiritual level. We have to recognize the truth of it. But then it is sort of bringing that into all aspects of our lives. So where we are deviating from that truth in our emotional reactions and our expectations, or our, uh, pain body issues, and stories about life, then, we need to wake up and sort of re-educate those. And that's where we need to bring that truth and try to help, help all of the aspects of us really understand it and align with it, and support them in letting go of their sort of path of defense, right? That they have believed is what they need in order to be safe or get their needs met. So is that, I don't know how clear I'm sounding with this, because it's like a big subject. Any other questions? So,
I think that like this just gave me a little bit of clarity, because I think I make it a lot more complicated than trying to figure out exactly what ego is and what's higher self and inner self and lower self, and I spend so much time trying to pick apart the pieces that, like, maybe I'm losing the bigger picture. And the bigger picture is just remember that there's another, we're not just this 3D meat suit. We're there's, you know, spiritual essence in us,
Yeah.
and try to connect to that, as opposed to, you know, like I think I'm getting a little, making it too complicated for myself to
Yeah,
parse out.
yeah. I mean, I think, you know, it's part of the difficulty in a way. The lectures are presented in a way that is kind of this large sort of, to me, it's like a big cauldron of things, right? And so it just takes a while swimming in that ocean, and then you begin to recognize the landscape a little more, or see, you know, how the concepts fit together, or, you know, how he's using that. So, yeah, I think, you know, if to struggle and strain and feel like, oh, I have to figure out exactly what he means here, you know, I think it's not uncommon, and I think that is, you know, it's worthy of some effort, you know, but I wouldn't get too hung up on it, right? Um, and he's saying here, you know, like that, sort of the work on the path is destined for us, that, you know, to help us accomplish the awakening of this new stuff that we've not consciously experienced before. Right. So, you know, again, he's pointing to something that, you know, it's kind of like the mind scratches its head and is trying to understand. Right. So that's okay too. But it's, you know, like it's, we don't have to fret about it a lot. Right? Just absorb it like a sponge. So, so now he goes, and then this is kind of, again, the sort of the beginning of the lecture, which is a little bit, you know, sort of pulling in everything. And I always find we talk a lot about, you know, sort of his intros, which are sort of the way that he opens it, is, you know, bringing in the connection to the whole path, and then he starts narrowing it down, you know, to the theme for the lecture, right? So here he's saying, life issues a call to every living individual. Most people do not sense this call. Only as you become aware of your own illusions can you become aware of the truth within yourself, and therefore in life. And then you will understand in each moment what the call of life wants to convey to you. How do you respond to it? Do you respond with your total being? Do you respond half-heartedly? Or do you resist responding at all and make yourself deaf to it? The call of life is a dynamic movement that can also be felt as a stream. This stream of life manifests differently to each one of us. It is at once universal and intensely personal. It is universal in that it aims at awakening the real self, absolute reality in everyone. It goes about this in totally unsentimental ways. It disregards personal attachment, social considerations, and any other peripheral values, including personal pain or pleasure. So that's saying a lot there. Let's just hold, you know, let that drop in a minute.
And the call of life is,
Again, I love what he's saying here, you know, because he's pointing here to, you know, it can be felt as a stream that manifests differently to each of us. So, you know, like if you look at your whole life as something that's been, you know, sort of flowing in a river, right? And then you come to this moment in your stream, right? And here you are in this class, something in that stream brought you here to this moment now, right? And maybe there's a next moment that's going to come, and something in you is responding alive, saying yes to, you know, your plan, or the next, you know, maybe you're going to bed tonight, you know, whatever. But, you know, it's like there is a kind of thing that if you pay attention, it's kind of energetic. It's sort of, to me, it's kinesthetic, right? But to others, it may feel differently, you know, and I'm always kind of tuning in, like, what does life want right now? You know, what does, you know, what is the sort of intuitive sense of, you know, what the greater whole, you know, needs. And sometimes that's the greater whole of sort of just running this business, or, you know, maybe it's the greater whole of looking at sort of a reaction that I just had, you know, so I got to take it in and do my own work, right? So, but it's kind of like, to me, sort of moment by moment, I think we really are learning to follow something that is also, it's kind of all around and outside of us, but it's also deep within us. So that, I think, is kind of neat that he talks about it as this stream, and he talks about it as both personal and universal. And I think it's really true, this unsentimental way, right? Where sometimes that life stream, takes us into shaking or squeezes or, losses or, lack of needs being met, these kinds of things. So Brian quotes here, whatever stands in the way of letting go of the ego is always, when fully exposed and understood, something that impairs our integrity and deforms our character structure. So, I mean, I guess I don't know if that quote is from this lecture. It may well be. Like, I think that's true. Where we also are struggling, right? That there's something to look at, within us that might be, impairing our integrity or like some form of defense, right? If awakening the real self requires what temporarily seems like destruction, this destruction will turn out to be the groundwork of the real inner life, the preparation needed to awaken the inner center. If the awakening brings what also happens to be most joyful to you, the very experience of joy proves that you are more attuned to your real self than you realize. And then this is, I think, something important in the way that he talks about it here. He says, moralizing, self-defeating attitudes often induce you to reject that which leads you to your destiny, this life stream, this, life call and self-fulfillment. And, because oftentimes, like, oh, it feels good or we want it. And then since, we have this mistaken idea that, somehow our spiritual development means deprivation, self-sacrifice, or we fear sort of our ego aggrandizement, oh, look at me, aren't I wonderful, I'm feeling so great, or I have, so much wonderful things happening to me, and the ego can claim these things, right? And so then we damp down, or we don't affirm our greatness. I think there's that one quote that is attributed to, I think, Nelson Mandela about, our real fear is our fear of, really becoming all that we can be. So anything more on this?
I watched oh, go ahead. I watched a movie today about Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, and they talked about finding your bliss, and how that might fit in with finding your, destiny,
right,
or your purpose in life. And I think that I think it's safe to say that 99 out of 100 times, for someone who finds their bliss, it's some form of service to others. Unless you are determined to be some kind of an aesthetic monk and live in a cave on a mountaintop in the Himalayas or someplace like that, typically your bliss is going to have something to do with giving that part of yourself to the service of mankind. So destiny, what does he say there? Finding your true purpose in life, or your destiny, might have something to do with finding your bliss.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of us in the Dying into Life class, we've been like listening to some of not Joseph Campbell, but Michael Meade, who's kind of coming from the same sort of, stories and fairy tales and myths kind of understanding. And he talks about it in the same, like talks about it like our inner genius, that our purpose was to become our, our own unique self, right? In some way, and that our daemon or our inner muse or our what they call the genius, that lives inside of us is, seeking to express into our lives. And then, and I think that's a similar thing to our bliss, to our call. Exactly. I think it's very similar.
Like, I think doing these Wednesday night lecture studies is a big part of your bliss.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, teaching the pathwork is,
yeah.
I think
yeah, go ahead.
I
I'm
think
sorry.
it's lecture 30. I think it's in lecture 30. There's a beautiful quote exactly around what you're saying about that when we're in service to others, that's where our joy can be, Yeah.
Exactly. And then I think the other thing that I've learned in the journey is like as long as we're sort of conceptual happiness or conceptual joy is good, right? I mean, there's some, like exciting understandings and things like that. But I think the guide talks about this too, like the real pleasure of being alive in a body, right? Has to be this embodied and sensitized system, right? And then when we are afraid of the pain and sort of numb out or, try to distract ourselves and have amnesia, like and deny, the loss, the grief, that kind of thing, we numb and then that limits our capacity for true pleasure in life, right? So the two things, like our sensitivity has to include, our yes to the hurtful things as well, like sort of break my heart open and let it get bigger sort of philosophy, that and as we kind of face and work with this, we begin to really see how that's not just a platitude, right? We don't want it to just be a mental idea that we're trying to superimpose over us, but part of it is learning how to trust our feeling flow, right? And once again, this energetic flow, right, that I think comes through us oftentimes as our expressions of grief or whatever emotionally we need to be present to. So it's kind of like learning to just really be with ourselves. And so then the guide is going from the stream of life. He said there's a subheading that Brian has, that self-realization is intense personal work, not vague beliefs. So I think, again, this is the idea that it just can't be a conceptual path, right? We have to live it. We have to actually do the experiential parts of it. So the guide says any path leading to genuine self-realization must be intensely personal and has to deal with intensely personal problems. And those who believe that imbibing general truth and collecting more truthful beliefs can accomplish the goal delude themselves. They do so because they don't want to look at the truth of who they are at the moment, and they prefer an idealized notion of themselves. Their very evasion alienates them even more from the goal, that the honest admission that they do not want to look at themselves and do not want to permit themselves to experience emotions they fear or disapprove of, and above all, do not wish to transform their character defects. Right. So partly here he's inviting us, right? Again, not to mask, right, but not to hide anything. So if we are aware that we have a no going on inside, of some form, once again, that no is our divine, sacred, free will right. And so it helps, right, just to speak the truth of the no, and ultimately, yes, probably in most instances, we want to transform that no into a yes, but we also have to hear its truth and its side of things and see, because there's often truth or some peace that we need. So another subheading.
Darlene, is that actual lecture words, or is that Brian's words, do you think?
Good question.
Where it says there about do not wish to transform their character defects. Is that Brian's words or is that the guide's words?
I think this is mostly the lecture. I mean, he does edit some of it, but I think, you know, mostly his stuff is more the subheadings and stuff.
Yeah,
So.
okay, yeah. Okay, all right, okay.
So I couldn't say for sure because I don't have one up side by side, but I think it's, I mean, and certainly it sounds like something the guide could say, right? Is there something that brings up for you?
No, it just sounds like different kind of terminology, that's all. Do not wish to transform their character. Yeah, it just sounds like different kind of words, but definitely interesting. I'm definitely going to have a look. Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's other lectures
Sounds like
that.
very much 12-step kind of lingo. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
sounds like
you know,
12-step
I
kind
think
of
there
words.
are, I mean, this also comes out of core energetics and bioenergetics as well, but came in with John P. So I think some of the lectures do later on begin to refer kind of more in that sort of language. And so this is not all that far in, but it may be some of that influence coming in, you know, because a lot of it did start to kind of dovetail with sort of the understanding of the character defenses, right? You know, and then of course the guide is also talking about our defects and that sort of thing. So another subheading is that seeing the temporary truth of ourselves opens the door to abundance. So he's saying the actual, not the theoretical activation of the real self with its vibrating life, limitless abundance, infinite possibilities for good, and its supreme wisdom and joy happens to the exact degree that you dare take a look at the temporary truth of yourself. This means feeling what you feel, having the courage to transform yourself into a better human being for no other reason than a desire to contribute to life, rather than to make an impression and grasp for approval. When the immediate barriers to transformation for its own sake are overcome, then the real self with all its treasures will clearly manifest. So, I mean, here's something that, you know, he's kind of confronting us with a little, and it comes in other flavors, I think, too. But this is, you know, an example where, you know, again, we're doing this, we're approaching this work sort of hoping that we can, you know, sort of bypass, you know, and fix ourselves and make our masks look even better. And, you know, so I kind of show up. A lot of people come into the path that way anyway, right? You know, like, because that's the ego's understanding of what's required, right? You know, I need self-improvement, or I need to improve my, and again, you know, he's saying transform character defects. So there's some of that there, but it's sort of at a deeper level than how I think the ego mind thinks of it, right? You know, like, because that wants to do it with the outer control and says, well, you should be this way, right? And then when we don't show up that way, then it thinks we should be punished for, you know, or, you know, like it doesn't like us and it gets mad at us or gets frustrated with us, right? And so this kind of approach, you know, within ourselves then creates this kind of weird split. So he's saying right here, stop the split right away, right? You know, it's like, don't go into opposition for anything that you're, you know, aware of. You know, it's kind of like Rumi's guest house, right? Whatever is there, trust it. It's there for a reason. It's got a message. It's, you know, seeking to help us and teach us and reveal to us something that's part of this call and this life stream.
Do you feel the same way about a destructive addiction?
I hear you. I mean, I think in some ways, you know, that trying to do outer will control of destructive addictions don't work either. And we're all pretty much, all of us in some way destructively addicted, right? You know, so I think in some ways for me, and what they say that I understand, and I'm no addiction expert, right? But what it makes sense to me, like they say, like most addiction gets like recycled because once you wake up out of your, sort of addictive, process, you feel ashamed. And it's the shame that then you can't bear. So you go use again, or you do, so I think in a way, if we can just lighten up on ourselves and let go of the shame and sort of be humble, right? Like in kind of in the 12-step program, it's saying, like I recognize I can't control this. I'm not in charge of it, right? That's to me, the very foundation of a kind of deeper humility with that outer ego will control part of us, right? So I think, it's the 12-step program is really talking about surrender there. So I don't know if that helps, but that. So our temporary shame traps us on the inside. One of those barriers is shame of which you are now, shame of what you are now. This shame makes you set up a wall of secrecy that makes you lonely. The loneliness may be denied or rationalized. Other circumstances may be blamed. It is your wish to hide yourself from yourself and others that separates you from them. In the deep recesses of your mind, you fear that you are different from others, that you are worse, and the shame of your difference cannot be exposed. This very secret conviction traps you in the illusion of your separateness, depriving you of the benefit of discovering your universality that offers its healing climate for your psyche. Again, this cannot be accomplished by theoretical understanding. So this is a very important thing that he's saying here too. And this last thing especially, right? That what he says this in other ways, like that what the shame requires is exposure. And that's a part of the depth of healing that the Pathwork offers in some of our group, work and processes, right? And to break through that wall of secrecy, aka loneliness, right? And to connect with this understanding, because usually, as we begin to share, this stuff that we've held in secret and in shame, like others receive it, recognize it within themselves, share their own, it's like there's a way that universality naturally shows up the minute somebody can risk, offering the truth and the realness.
Well, it's definitely what came up the other in our group, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
It's yeah. And I think too, like, I mean, I know we're just touching on 12 steps somehow, but I think the shame often links in with addiction as well, doesn't it? Or what the way that the ego will try and deal with the pain of whatever's of the pain of the shame,
Exactly. So for me, like a lot of, to me, the whole healing of the ego is the healing of this sort of shame pride thing, this sort of finding the sort of the truth of our sort of real self, which doesn't mean our exalted, like God self necessarily. It means, like that we're both and, we have the light and we have feet of clay, and we, we're here, because, we wanted to serve, as you were pointing out, like we deep inside, we want to serve. And so, and we have no idea really how much serve we're doing, even when it doesn't seem like it, or the levels of service that we're doing. I think he speaks to this sometimes as well. So, to have dignity and humility is, I think, sort of like a huge healing for this part of us that's always struggling with, am I okay? Am I not okay? Like, well, do they approve of me? Will they not? Like, it gets us out of sort of needing that and approving of ourselves in that simple way of like I see myself grounded in reality, and I'm not perfect, but, I'm a good person or whatever, so. And in some ways, that can be enough. Now, there can be also, really strong energies tied up in the idealized self-image. So I'm not saying, well, just, like tell that part of you to shut up, because that won't work either. Like that voice can be brought in and heard as well. So, and some of this I think may come in here. It says, shame hides pride. So this is something that's sometimes hard to recognize, right? Because, we feel like when we're in shame, we feel so small and so little and so crappy. It's like, how could that possibly have anything to do with our pride? But if you look at it, it's kind of like, again, like you're feeling that way because your bar is so high. And so there's some part of you that's saying, that has all this pride and says, you shouldn't be where you are, you should be here instead, right? Much better than you are, much higher than you are. So, that's a kind of pride, right? So he says, the solitude of inner secretiveness cannot be relieved, no matter how favorable your outer circumstances. Such loneliness can be relieved only when you overcome the pride hidden by your shame. The intensely personal work of overcoming your pride leads to the realization of the universal values that alone can give you the courage to go with the life stream. So here I think too, like we're terrified of feeling the shame, right? The energy of shame, right? And that kind of thing. And it's usually our own pride that's shaming us. Right? So if we can sort of recognize, and like he said here, overcome that pride, we identify with the part that's reacting to the beating or the judgment or whatever, which is, the one of the child parts of us, right? But this other defense child part, is, heaping shame on us usually. So if we can't, we need to begin to recognize, that this is her pride somehow, right? Does that make sense? When we think we should be better or different or bigger or something than we actually are, then there's some pride there.
How about when we think we are better than other people? Creates the same kind of separateness.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and usually there's both sides of the coin somewhere in there, it's like we'll find, we have our reaction to ourselves and then also our reaction to others. So welcome, Wendell. This is somebody new coming in, and I think also we had Jacob join us. So we're just sort of going through the lecture, and so you'll have to just kind of follow along here as best you can. And if you want to stay afterwards, we can see if we can. So this lecture is on the call of the life stream, and so we're talking about sort of this shame, and how it's really connected to pride. And then he also talks about rebellion and conformity, also are both creating a kind of bondage. And so this also, I think, touches a little bit on that lecture 49 on authority, right? So he says, no matter how much you rebel against conformity and social laws, you still find yourself confined within the ego self, deeply immersed in its dualistic struggle between conformity and submission, rebellion, versus rebellion and defiance, right? And so he says, true emancipation from the ego's outer rules require neither conformity nor rebellion. It acts on the inner values that may or may not coincide with the dictates of society or whoever else we're trying to please, right? In neither case will the person using inner values be damaged. He or she will become more whole, even in a temporary upheaval. Even if you choose incorrectly, right? It's like in some ways there is no incorrect, right? That's a part of the duality. But like if we're following our inner authority, our inner truth, that inner daemon, that inner, uh, genius, that inner call within us, then we're not needing to respond to the outer world, and then we are neither having to submit or conform. We're just doing what we find is most correct for us, right? So a lot of times we have difficulty in our world sort of with rebelliousness or submission. And so he says conformity is really often fear of disapproval. So in some ways, he says the call of life disregards the superficial morality most people ardently adhere to or equally ardently fight against. This morality is based on the fear of disapproval. People may fight it because in their minds, goodness is equated with deprivation. The call of life disregards outer appearance and short-sighted sentimentality. It surges towards bringing all individuals into their birthright, since it is based entirely on universal values. Everything that matters is within it. So, the shoulds, right, whether they're coming from outside of us or inside of us, I think are part of, what he's saying, like the call of life is not listening to those voices, right? It's a deeper level. Any comments in this part?
I would say that we get a lot of shoulds and shouldn'ts in our daily, life from outside. People will tell you all along the way, you should do this, you should do this, you should do this, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do this, and you shouldn't do this.
Right.
So from the time that we're young children, we are kind of bombarded with shoulds and shouldn'ts to get to the point where we can say, I'm not going to listen to those shoulds and shouldn'ts anymore. It's a big step.
Right. It's part of the maturation of consciousness. And in the beginning, it's like we are under, our parents as authorities, right? But the process of individuation requires that we internalize that authority, which the guide says in another lecture, I think something, like we have to take every question inside that we have, and like look at it from our own inner evaluation, right? You can listen to somebody says I should do this or that, but what do I think, right? What's my truth? What's my reality? And it could be aligned with what other people say, or it might be against what other people say. It doesn't really matter. That's not what's important, because it's not about that. It's about you following your own reality. And if you don't, right, then you never, really live your life, right? So what did you incarnate for if not to live your life somehow, right? And so we're always working to, we have several different kinds of masks, but one of them definitely is the love mask, which, wants everybody to love it. So we want to appease, we want to appeal to, we want to, go along with, we want to, give people what we think they want. And sometimes that could be in the higher self truth of things, right? That we serve, that we offer something, that we care, but again, if it feels like it's constrained by this fear that, I can't, if I wanted to do something different, I wouldn't, or I couldn't, because, that disapproval would, be the end of me, right? Then we probably need to look at it a little deeper. So then next subheading is on senseless struggle. Why does humanity put up such a struggle against fulfilling its destiny when such destiny brings nothing but good? Why do you resist hearing the call of the life stream when it brings you all that is safe, good, productive, and joyful? It is the tragic battle of humanity. On the one hand, you are very disturbed by the insecurity of your existence. You sense the waste of your life as long as you pay exclusive allegiance to the outer self and therefore to outer values. On the other hand, you do everything in your power to maintain your unhappy state. In fact, you seek more and more means to reinforce your ego identification, more outer ways, outer activities, outer beliefs, outer escapes. At times, you may succeed only in making yourself deaf to the voice from deep within. At other times, you feel the deep unrest, but you refuse to understand it. So is everybody muted? I'm hearing some background noise. So unless you're talking, go ahead and mute for now.
Maybe you could mute us all.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do. There we go. I think that's got us okay. Okay. So activating the real self brings deep inner peace. So only those who consciously and deliberately make the decision and commit themselves. And he says once and for all, but I was like, yeah, well, what is that? Like every day, all the days, ongoingly. To me, that, to living their life for the primary purpose of activating the real self can find the deep inner peace that exists, even while inner errors still prevent total self-realization. Right? So like if you know in your heart, that's your alignment. That's the aim of the arrow. That's, like what your intention is, right? You don't have to have already arrived there, it's like that's not possible. And you can sense that, you don't have to, sort of prove yourself anymore, right? You can just experience the truth of, you're a being on a journey, working with healing and aligning and transforming, all of these lost parts of self that are in separation, right? Within and around you, so, inner errors, then, don't make yourself turn against yourself in some kind of self-abusive way, which, like then we don't feel worthy of the light, right? We don't feel like somehow we deserve from this place of being judged and criticized so much. So as long as you fail to orient yourself completely toward activating the inner center of your real self, and again, this is your inner intention, right? Not your following through and complete, success at it, right? But just your true dedication, your true, that's what I want more than anything in the world, right? Then you cannot know real safety, peace, and well-being, and nor can you use the storehouse of potential within yourself or experience your freedom to use the unlimited resources of the universe for your benefit. But you see how you can reverse that and say, okay, if I have totally dedicated myself to that, right, then I get to use the storehouse of potential within myself. Then I get to experience the unlimited resources of the universe, towards this aim, this worthy aim, this, choice that I've made. So not being able to do any of this or not being able to be what you can be then becomes this, endless loss, grief, pain that you need to allow yourself to experience consciously in order to have the incentive to do something about it, right? You know, but that's not in this whipping post boy sort of, you know, self-judgment and self-frustration, but just to allow, you know, a true soft pain where there has been sort of lack of fruition in some way, right? You know, some place where you felt stuck. So by contrast, the pursuits of the ego, no matter how great you are.
Darlene,
Yeah, go ahead.
just listening to you read that, that sort of to me sounding like that when the guide talks about the giving and receiving, you know, like, because to me, and I know I'm at the beginning of understanding all this, but the giving and the receiving to me that the guide talks about is the giving is like that giving my love to God or to the creator, and then the receiving is receiving back the joy of my life, you know. And so this here, what you just read out now, that really spoke to me about that, you know, that when we're in that giving and then the receiving back of our life, you know, that's that whole it feels like that what you just read.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that is essentially the same teaching, you know, and I think there's other ways too. I think there even is a lecture on commitment, cause and effect, that he talks about this as well. There's, you know, like, and we get confused because the mind, the ego thinks, oh, I've got to fix it, I got to do it right, I got to, you know, somehow manifest it. And, you know, like the first step is we just need to choose it. And then also trust God to help us bring it about, right? You know, like when we're aligned, when our prayer is that, which is another way of saying our intention and our choice is our prayer, right? So when we make that prayer, and that's really our desire and our longing, you know, from our deepest place, then yeah, exactly. That's the giving, and then the receiving can follow. So I can't remember where I left off. I think I read this, but let's go ahead and do it again. As long as you fail to orient yourself completely toward activating the inner center of your real self, you cannot know real safety, peace, and well-being. Nor can you use the storehouse of potential within yourself or experience your freedom to use the unlimited resources of the universe for your benefit. Not being able to do this, not being able to be what you can be, is an endless pain that you need to allow yourself to experience in order to have the incentive to do something about it. By contrast, the pursuits of the ego, no matter how great your accomplishments, will never give you peace and security, nor the sense of being the best you can be. The ego drive may appear to give you power over others, but it cannot ever give you autonomy and independence, so that sooner or later the illusion of power over others is exposed as fake. So tune in and ask yourself, what is your aim? How far do you wish to go? Do you commit yourself completely? And then visualize any specific symptoms that you feel, you know, are blocking that aim, that commitment. And he says any disturbance is merely a symptom of the basic ill of exclusive ego identification. So see if you can, you know, see where somehow in this you're identified, what's blocking you is sort of identified with some sickness, distortion, unhappiness. So could anybody get a connection with that they want to share? Or say something more about what came to you as you tune into your aim for yourself?
For me, it's this idea that I need to be nice, quote unquote, nice. Good girls are nice. And so being angry or expressing my anger or even having healthy boundaries, which is totally a distortion and it's totally an ego centered thing, right? I see how that's totally blocking me from moving deeper.
Right, you can kind of see sort of the distortion where you recognize that you can't even have a healthy boundary in some sense, right? So see if you can put that distortion, into to words like, if I separate, if I become different than how they want, then what happens to me? If I'm not nice.
Yeah, I did. I wrote this down. I actually said what came to me. Try it and see what happens. Right? There's two situations in my life that I have some conflict with, and both of them are setting boundaries, and I'm very uncomfortable with them. So, yeah.
And in some ways, yeah, it sounded like, somewhat of your higher self, chiming in there, because in some
Yeah.
ways that is what we have to do, is just risk, right? And we're more capable of risking more clearly we see it, right? The more clearly we understand, what we believe, and how it might not be true, and how it's probably not helping anyway, that kind of thing.
Right.
So
And I really, I can clearly see that it's a very young and immature and
yeah.
fearful part of me. So, I like it when you talk about, well, we just need to grow up. We just need to mature and step into this authority. And
Right.
it really helps solidify that for me.
Right. And that's really, true. And like, again, the child didn't grow up because she didn't have the support to do so.
Yeah.
So that's where, again, we have to become our own helper, or our own mother, our own supporter, like some kind of aspect of this universal mother self, right? To, help the child grow up. Like, so she's, scared, or, to not be nice, right? And so your higher self is saying, well, try it and see what happens. But, your higher self could, say, well, just do it, or it could say some way like, how can I help invite you, or what could I do to help you, trust enough just to risk a little bit, or what would be like a small risk, something you could do, like a little bit of not nice that could come out, or something like, and help her find the way to make that step, right? Rather than just expecting her to do it by herself now, right?
Yeah.
So only the real self can walk into the benign universe. So where your real self is not activated, the doors to the benign universe are closed. This is not because some forbidding authority decided that you are not worthy of this or that particular fulfillment. It is simply because something within you bars the way, and that something has to be found so you can eliminate it, right? So this is sort of really important, I think, in the path work, right? Because we come up against these frustrations, and then we just want to try to force ourselves through them in some way, and it, it's like really something a little more skillful. Like, we need to find, a way to undo this thing that bars the way. So whatever the obstruction is, it makes you afraid of letting go of the ego. So you remain centered in and oriented to the outer ego. This outer ego is incompatible with the unified world of total good, since it is split off from it in duality. It can be open only to partial good, to which there exists as always in dualities another undesirable side. This undesirable side may weaken the wish for good entirely unconsciously. And then also whatever stands in the way of letting go of the ego is always, when fully exposed and understood, something that impairs your integrity and deforms your character structure. Hence, the deep inner conscience feels undeserving of total good and cringes from it. That very character defect makes the personality unable to cope with the good even where it exists. So only the total self can relate to and unite with total good. You can test this right now. Take any problem you are working on, be it an outer problem you wish to change or an inner condition you wish to overcome. Meditate, expand yourself, and reach for the total goal. Claim this total goal. How often does it happen that you feel it is impossible to do so? So he's using a thought experiment, right? Like an affirmation experiment that actually, rather than, necessarily looking for affirming the affirmation, we're inviting all of the voices that want to argue with us to show up, right? So if you feel sort of, like with this problem, what would be your total goal to overcoming this problem? See if you can imagine what it is. And then, like, see if you can make a claim for this with all of your being. Can you like totally claim it, or do you feel inside resistance, blocks come up, like somehow that you cannot fully claim it? So if anybody gets anything with that, feel free to share. And he talks a lot about and keeps weaving this into character defects and like that kind of thing. But I'm gonna have to read it at a deeper level because I'm not quite sure I'm following exactly what he's pointing to there. Seems like certainly like it's a beautiful a way to test, like, okay, align, say what you want, and then notice where parts of you don't fall into place, right? And then that kind of gives you your cutting edge, or like the next level to explore and work with, and then go in and have your dialogue with it, feel it in your body where the inner know is, right? And try to understand it more fully. So a block doesn't yield to willing, it only yields to yielding. And this is a very powerful, truth, I think, that is hard for us to always be able to grasp. So when you really want to claim your goal and you still feel it is impossible, that there is some wall that does not let you get through, this wall must never, under any circumstances, be disregarded or glossed over. You must never use pressure from your will to overcome the no of this wall. Such forcing will remove you further from your real self within, and hence from the reality of the life where all good is available. Instead, interpret the meaning of the wall, translate it into clear words. Whether you doubt that you have your goal, whether you doubt that you can have your goal, or you feel guilty about getting it, or you have a sense of not deserving it, or you're afraid of life's demands when you do have it, these still do not add up to the final answer. The reservation sometimes is beyond that within yourself, and there's where it must be linked with a character defect you have not really faced, nor do you wish to, because some part of you does not want to abandon it. Character transformation is an absolute necessity in order to shed the ego identification. Shed does not mean giving the ego up, but of using it as a tool to find the inner being, and then allowing the ego to integrate with it. Such integration is possible only when certain character defects have been transformed, or when you are truly willing to transform them in all sincerity without subterfuge. There must be a total commitment without pretense or play acting. When this is your total response to life, the life stream will become discernible, and its wise guidance and meaningfulness will become a powerful presence in your life. So this is another thing that, like we try to work to, is really like letting this guidance become active and with us, on an everyday basis. So self-judgment versus self-honesty. Anybody have anything more to say on the total commitment part? So judging, moralizing, and perfectionism occurs when values are based on outer standards in order to please or impress others to conform. Moralizing tends to show to others how right, good, or superior you are. When you moralize, you always need to prove something. To whatever extent moralizing exists, it exists only for the sake of appearances, and not because you are really concerned with a moral issue as such. I find this very interesting, right? When we look at, like in the outer world as well. And also when I look at some of the places where, in general, I think I don't moralize, right? But I can see where, he's calling me to a certain recognition, of my own moralizing. So he says, you may pay lip service to the feelings and rights of others, or to the liberation of the real self, or the self of others. But deep inside, this is not the motive. The motive is to appear right or good, or to prove something. That's the one that I can find, like feel where there's this thing that you're trying to prove, that energy of proving, right? That's inside of us.
Darlene, could you give a few examples of moralizing? Because I can think of a few, but I just want to make sure that we're on the same page with the definition.
Right. I think the easiest way is always, wherever we hear the word should, right? It's a form of moralizing. And one of the ways to look at it is, okay, moralizing, is kind of standing above things and saying, like we're bad or wrong if we don't do it how they say, or how, the way the Bible says, or the way the law says, or, whatever. Does that help?
Yeah, I was on the same page with that as far as the shoulding. So yeah, that's good. Thanks.
I think it's, it's almost implied, in any kind of thing. And for me, like I can feel a place sometimes where I'm sort of in my lawbreaker rebel place, in some committee meetings or something, like that feel like, they're not really seeing me. So I probably should look at the character defect somewhere in that the guy's playing too. But like, so then I kind of have this pride and contempt place that I can go to, that sort of, you can't, you're ridiculous that you can't see this point or whatever, so it's like, that's a kind of put down, right? And to me, that's a kind of moralizing too, right? Like what we're trying to do is be equal, right? And to grant free will. So anything that goes up and down, puts up and down, or tries to control, I think is part of a moralizing piece.
That's moralizing with others. Is it? What about moralizing with parts of our own personality?
Oh yeah, we do that all the time, and it's what causes us to be in such suffering all the time. So
Like
to me,
our
that's
idealized self-image will moralize with our lower selves. I guess, right?
Exactly. Yeah, all the time. Or any other thing that it doesn't like, such anything it wants to put to the, cast away a shadow. Right. So yeah. And that really is the depth of our suffering, when we're moralizing to ourselves. So the person who genuinely desires to transform character defects is not in the least concerned with outer appearances, right? Or with what others think, but exclusively with the transformation itself, whether others see and admire it or not. So I even find myself sometimes, like I'm recognizing, that there's a part of me acting out, a little bit, but I'm not moralizing with myself. I'm more like, seeing that I'm doing it, taking responsibility for it, right? And letting it play out a little bit, watching also where it might, but trying to, be more conscious, right? What is this in me, right? It's showing up now. So I can be in observance, but in order to observe, I have to let it out a little bit, right? So if I'm clamping down on it and say, you can't show up, I don't learn about it. So it's nice to have, a community or friends that, can give you a little leeway when you are, clearly in a reaction at some level, but, and they don't just require you to, shut it down or turn it off or whatever, right? But it's like, it's by bringing it out that we can understand more clearly is how, to me, the most important thing without causing major harm, of course. So self-criticism hides inner insistence to resist change. So, and that's the other thing too, like this is why our beating on ourselves never works, because it's like, as long as we're beating on ourselves, like it's kind of like the top dog, underdog, like, they're the parent that says you should, and then the inner child that goes, fuck you. No way, I'm not, I won't, because to do so, for the child to surrender in that situation to sort of your outer moralizing part, would be, it's like it's still sort of the guardian of the inner genius, right? It's still fighting for the survival of the real self, right? And so that rebellion is probably the healthiest thing that's going on at the moment, but it's not going anywhere because it's just kind of like at loggerheads. So he says false, damaging, tortured, moralizing, and self-accusation always hides a deep inner resistance to not change. Moralizing is a tortured inner movement. Recognizing the fault in question is unbearably painful only because you refuse to give it up. Yes, and like I think also only because you refuse to make it this awful thing that you are. So how can you give it up, right? So refusing to give up your negative trend by moralizing brings more negativity in its wake, even though it seems to convey an honest intent to see the fault and observe high standards of morality because you are so unhappy about the defect. So, some people probably are, like saying that, kind of as a mask, right? And deep inside, they really know they don't want to give it up. And for all of us in some way, whatever we're holding, whatever we're moralizing towards ourselves about, we can't give it up, right? Like you can't use the force and current to make the correction here. That would be a violation of free will within the deep inner being, right? So we have to really see sort of this moralizing voice as such a, that's, if we're going to transform anything first, let's go for that one. Because once that one is done, then the rest of it sort of becomes easier.
So any suggestions for giving up moralizing? I'm going to give up moralizing for Lent next year.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and some of it I think is just to kind of begin to notice how often you're doing it, right? And how it feels inside when you do it.
Yeah.
Because to me, that's the way that we teach ourselves how we're creating our own suffering. And by experiencing it directly, right? So then, and recognizing what it is that we're experiencing. Oh, that crappy feeling is my own self beating on myself, right? Then we begin to think, okay, maybe, I can have a different response, right? Or even sometimes, like, I mean, this is what happened to me. I finally saw the extent to which I was beating on myself, and it opened my heart compassionately towards myself, right? It's like, even I didn't deserve that much self-hatred, right?
I think sometimes too, like there's one particular part of my life where I didn't realize it was just, I guess it's that unconscious, subconscious, aware of that belief that I held that was sort of recreating these things it kept, and it would belong in this moralizing part, in that I was judging myself and others, but unbeknownst to me, kind of, because I was sort of doing this, living this, very good life, And but when I became aware of it, it was like this shock horror, like, oh my God, I really think that, and it was a pretty rude awakening, that I had those kind of ideas, and that it was quite contrary to what I thought, and but it was it was pretty enlightening, I can tell you, like to go, oh, okay. So but it really explained a lot of stuff, and but it's still, still a lot of work to let go of it because it's so deep in us, like it's got in there without us knowing. So it takes a fair while to get it out,
Yeah, it's a defense,
Yeah.
it's a
So yeah, good idea about giving it up for Lent, Frank. Yeah.
right. I think it helps to see it as a defense, right? And then like, so that means that there's some part of us that got traumatized and terrorized at some level, right? And so then it's doesn't know any better in some way. So if we can catch it, and like in the same way that it needs the universal mother just as much as the other part of us that it's been beating on needs the universal mother, right? So somehow, to me, it always feels like having the same kind of compassion once I feel the fear that drives it. And one of the, I remember the image when, I used to be like just, like sort of knocked to my knees in a sense, like I couldn't get up, I couldn't do anything because I would, be in this kind of depression state that I called depression. I didn't really understand it. But one day I was sitting there and I was aware, like, there was this inner conflict in me, and how it was showing up was I got this image of an infant with fangs, and that infant was like just clamping down into my shoulders, and so like seeing that, instead of just being frustrated with myself for being stuck, I realized, oh, there's something more going on here, that needs some kind of attention, right? And so when we can see deeper instead of just sort of at the superficial level that the mind takes us usually, then we can start really having compassion, and I think the healing comes with our own self-love, right? With our own humility, our own, like, if we can't love ourselves, how can we believe that God could love us? And so there is a way in which our flaws weigh us down, our denials of our lower self, all of those things. But more than that, I think, is all of our judgment of our flaws, and all of our, beliefs that we somehow should be better than we are. And that creates, I think, the layer that's truly causes the suffering. So here he's talking about when commitment to change is deep, our flaws don't weigh us down. And this I found too, right? Like when we really know that our commitment is there to change, they show up and they just, oh, well, thank you for showing up. Now I can work on you. So the genuine desire to transform defects is never burdened by admitting a fault, no matter what it may be, because the wish to change is so genuine. In this desire, you express your love for the universe because you wish to contribute to life by your very being. Such resolution lightens the heart, even if you may not be capable of the transformation right away, because there are still missing links that have to be understood. Let this be a measure for you in the continuation of your pathwork. When the distortion you discover cuts deeply into your soul and makes you hopeless about yourself, or despair about your ability to transform the defect, know that on a deeper level of your being, you do not wish to give up this trend. And then go ahead and find out why not. Again, he says, don't beat up yourself for not wanting to give it up, just understand it. Why don't you, right? So we have to be curious. We have to just keep exploring what's alive in us and not judge any of it. So stream forth in affirmation, not the old negation. When your personality is geared to a positive soul movement, there will be no obstruction to transforming a character defect, and consequently, no obstruction to the unlimited abundance of good available in the universe. Try this inner movement by letting yourself stream forth in complete affirmation instead of the old negation. When this inner movement can take place, when you move toward the world with a relaxed attitude of being equally ready to give and receive, transformation will not seem hazardous. It will seem like a wonderful adventure. When you find yourself stuck in your journey to reach unlimited good and creative power within yourself, find the key to where you are negative in expressing your desire, and also where you are connected with a persisting negativity. There must be a corresponding character defect that is equally difficult to give up. For as long as it is not seen, the negativity must remain. The negativity blocks unfoldment, self-expression, and fulfillment, as well as the creative powers within you. This is a key for many. For some time on this path, you have been primarily concerned with uncovering your defects and illusions, your negativity or destructiveness, which you deny and negate. This is very important. Now, a second major phase of the work can be envisaged, the phase in which you practice extending yourself into the universe. Wherever you succeed because you are inwardly free, you will see new manifestations in your life as never before. Where you still feel yourself blocked, unable to believe, unable to follow through, you will find deeper aspects of yourself that you could not bring out before, and which you will now recognize as deformations of your character structure, without incurring the past danger of closing the door through your damaging moralizing. Your freedom in this respect sets the stage for the commitment to transformation. How deeply do you want this transformation? Why are you still reluctant to transform? The moment you are truly ready to transform them, you will find the door no longer closed. You will feel it swing into the unlimited universe. You will be able to extend yourself into the universe and consequently feel worthy and capable of receiving from it. Then no good you desire needs to receive, it needs to have a shadow side. At this moment, you will also understand the real values and will do away with all false morality. The more you are willing to truly transform defects, the less necessary the outer superimposed values become. They are often senseless, especially from the point of view of life's call, which requires your total response and commitment. Now, why are you so afraid of this total commitment to life, of relinquishing ego identification, of the positive manifestation that can enrich you? Why do you resist the good and battle to maintain painful struggle and insoluble conflict? Why do you fear the good that liberates you? And why do you put your faith in the imprisoning ego of the little outer self and the little outer values? There are several answers to these questions depending on the angle. Let's choose the following approach. So is everybody good staying a little while longer? We're at our 9 o'clock closing time, but I wouldn't mind completing this a little bit further. So if you need to leave, you may. So when you doubt a larger reality and do not take a chance on it, you stay in a world of duality. So as you know, this dualistic world is characterized by the following conflict. If I am unselfish, I must suffer. But I don't want to suffer. But if I am selfish, I will be rejected, despised, not loved, left alone, and that is suffering too. In this struggle, you go back and forth seeking a solution. The more you believe these two alternatives are your only choices, the more you are bound to experience life according to them. You do not dare to be unselfish, and you cannot wholly want to be unselfish, since it means giving up what you believe is personal fulfillment and happiness. Nor can you fully commit yourself to a life of selfishness, partly due to the ever-present existence of your real self, partly because you fear the world's opinion. This is the tragedy of this senseless struggle. You cannot extricate yourself from its meshes as long as you identify with and entrust yourself to the values, rules, and concepts of ego logic. The prison of indecision. When you want to be transformed, you must want to give up selfishness and the desire to cheat life, yourself, and others in whatever form. You cannot wholly risk this when it spells the sacrifice of all you think you want. But the most painful state is indecision, and this holds true on all levels. It is your fate as long as you have not transcended the ego level of reality. You cannot reconcile fulfillment and unselfishness. So you remain undecided. You continue to vacillate between two camps. If you were capable of totally committing yourself to a life of selfishness, you would soon come out of it because you would recognize that it leads nowhere, that it does not lead to the salvation you half-heartedly seek in both camps. We are all in this struggle, every one of us. All your problems are an expression and direct outcome of this duality. Look at your problems and go deeply enough into them, and you will see that this is so. You fear the impulses of the larger, wiser self, but cannot want wholeheartedly to commit yourself to it as long as you believe that some disadvantage will result from your decision. That you are capable of reaching for and receiving the good of the universe only when your defects are being accepted and overcome may at first glance appear like the concept of reward and punishment. This concept is a distortion of the process. Reward and punishment suppose an outer authority who hands out the just deserts of the individual's actions and attitudes. Rewards or punishments are often supposed to take place only in a hereafter. This, however, is a mechanism taking place within the personality. First of all, innermost self is aware of the incongruity of reaching for the best while refusing to give the best. Obtaining the best is a burden you fear when you are not willing to also give your best. So giving your best is impossible when you associate it with sacrifice and disadvantage. So do people see the kind of vicious circle here? Are people kind of recognizing this in themselves? Because it's one of these sort of, again, it connects a lot, I think, with the love mask level, but it's also universal in a way, right? And that this sort of desire for what we want, we want to have what we want, our own self-will, our own desire, our own selfishness, right? Versus sort of the spiritual understanding of selflessness, or, that we know even in the higher self that, giving is receiving, and we want to give, right? So when we're conflicted, it's a real tough battle inside. And it's partly this, that we somehow believe that there is, a sacrifice and a disadvantage if we take the higher road. Belief in reward and punishment points to deep hidden despair.
Sorry, before we go on, I just want to say that it's been my experience that that's true. I think a lot of us feel this way because oftentimes sacrifice is really. Can you go back to the vicious circle, please?
Mm-hmm.
Giving your best is impossible when you associate it with sacrifice and disadvantage.
Because we withhold naturally, right? Like there's an inner no inside if we feel like if we have to give. So that's why you can't you should, you should give of yourself, right? Because, the rebellion inside, like we'll give, but it'll be half-assed, half-hearted, and, like contaminated by the inner no, right?
So the solution is to only do what we want to do, even if it's perceived as selfishness.
Exactly. And then if our desire is, to go beyond that selfishness, we commit to the work of like honestly doing that and not trying to spiritually bypass and pretend that we're already there. Right. So it's like, and again, that may not be that you act it out, like, but, and you may even decide, that it's better in the situation, to say yes, even though you feel no inside. But if you're conscious that that's what you're doing, right, it can make all the difference, right? And then you can continue to work with it. And sometimes there are ways, like when we think about, well, I really don't want to go to work in the morning, but if I don't go to work, I don't get a paycheck. So I guess I do want to, right? Like there's a voice that might say you should go to work, but if I look inside, it's really a choice where I want to, because, the consequence of not doing it, so it's kind of a coerced choice, which we don't particularly like. But at least we're acknowledging, like, okay, this is, I'm choosing it, right? And then we have to work with, what is it that's making what is the no about, what is so unhappy about saying yes to doing what we feel we need to, and helping that part work it through, so it can join in, like, and say yes with us, right? So the more parts of us that we have going in the same direction, then the more freely we're moving in that direction, right? Like if only 51% of us is saying yes, like we're really going up against a lot of resistance trying to accomplish that. So it might be better just to stay with where we are in the 49% no instead of trying to haul them or force them or move them in the yes direction.
Thanks, that's clear.
Honestly, I get a little
I
bogged
think
down in the best.
part of that as well for me is that, like that whatever we believe keeps coming around.
Right. And so there's going to be a part of the image, a part that the image is going to play in that. What did you say, Frank? I
get a little bogged down in just the word the best. What is the best?
Good question. So my belief is that every one of us is always giving the very best they can in every moment.
You think that's true?
I believe that's true.
I'm sort of, part of me wants to substitute. Can you go back to the circle again?
Yeah.
Part of me wants to do a little substitution in here, because for me, I'm stuck on that part where the guide says, "Thy will, not my will, be done." So in my mind, giving the best is like giving my will over to God.
Yes, except unless you can't, right? So you don't want to fake it. So right. You do it as best you can, right. Which is giving your best in the moment, right? Like from wherever we are in our evolutionary journey, all we can do is give our best. And usually if we, like from hindsight, we can look back and think, oh, I should have done better or something like that. But if we go back to that moment and ask ourselves, why didn't you do better? We're going to answer, because that's what I was doing. It's the best I did. It's like where I was in the moment, right? So for me, that's the best we can in the moment. Our willingness, is to, serve, and to continue to deepen and improve and, grow and, do better. Right. But in any given moment, I think if we could do better, we would for the most part. And that doesn't belie that, yeah, my lower self is acting out and I'm completely, like I'm in negative choice. I'm in negative pleasure. I'm in negative intentionality. Right. But if that's what I'm choosing and where I'm at, I think it's like the moralizing voice that overlooks it and says, well, you should be doing something different. It's like, this is what's alive in me now. This is what's here. And my best bet is to try not to hurt somebody with it, right? Or to have some consciousness around it, or like maybe go make amends afterwards or something like that, where I'm, aware that my best has fallen very far short of what God would have wanted.
How about the truth. My best, giving my best would be being in truth
I like that. Mhm.
all the time. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's, I mean, it's like, and just being the truth rather than, like trying to speak the truth, like we are the truth. We are the truth of who we are in every moment.
Okay, darling. Feel like you're trying to take some weight off my shoulders.
I think, yeah.
I appreciate that.
Uh-huh. Okay, so belief in reward and punishment points to deep hidden despair. The very existence of a belief in punishment and reward covers up the deep despair that unselfishness brings deprivation. So you are forced to hold back the total desire to love and to give. When the real self is activated, this conflict no longer exists. It is possible to activate the real self when this particular conflict in you is brought out of hiding. Inside the reality of the inner center, the split no longer exists. You will find it equally possible to give of yourself wholeheartedly, to love, to be unselfish, to be humble, to relinquish the egocentricity of the frightened child, to allow others to be free, no matter what this means for you, and yet not give up anything. So that's saying a lot there. And I think I can testify to, that being, not 100% my experience, but a good part of it, right? That we can really do that. There's something in us, when we are aligned in this way, right? That is really seeking for what, like you're saying, what does God want? It's kind of like, what does the universe want? What does the whole need? What, how can I, because most of the time, when you get to this level, your needs are already more or less fulfilled, like you don't have a need to be important, or you don't have a need to be loved, or, to always be in control or anything like that, right? And so there's a freedom because you're less self-centered in some ways. And then of course we always have certain ways that we are, like in certain ways that our self-will, to me, is kind of like the last piece of the work that we do is on the will, right? On the self-will. So we're all still definitely working in that realm. But I think most of what we're already saying is, like as we grow, it gets easier and easier to just want to give, right? And where we don't want to give, we shouldn't beat ourselves up. We should understand that there's some part that has deprivation issues, needs to be seen, need to be understood. Maybe, we can figure out what it really does need and what it's seeking as a false need, but we need to ask it, right? To bring it into the light. So, since the feeling of not having to give up anything will change into a conviction that gaining everything is possible. And this will be so because you are free enough to want both. When you take on the transformation of your defects, you will like yourself enough to open yourself to all the good that wants to come to you. When you begin to succeed in this transformation, you will be strong enough to stand happiness. You can claim the best when you are in the process of transforming whatever makes you dislike yourself. Whether or not you are aware of this self-dislike, whether or not you are still projecting your self-hate onto others, then you will realize the truth of absolute reality and of your real self, which is that there is no limit to expansion. So we're always just growing. We're here now and we're just getting bigger. and it's okay to be where we are now. I mean, it's kind of like saying, we're 12 and then we're going to be 13 and then we're going to be 14, and it's not wrong to be 12 right now. Through this unfolding, your intuition will become strong and reliable. You will then heed the demand of your personal life stream. You will have the courage to go with it, whether or not it seems to conform with outer expectations, rules, and values. As long as you are very determined to follow the inner values, the outer values will cease to be important. either in your own mind or in the outer manifestation of your life. You will therefore no longer fear when your life does not conform to convention. Soon, outer life will follow suit and no friction will accrue. The world will fall into step with you. So that closes the, that he's got a really good exercise at the end, but let me just comment on this piece because I think this is something, that, partly also comes with age and, development, like this is the wisdom process of the pathwork, right? And so it takes a lifetime, but it is this where we, we do have this deep inner sense of our own inner values. And so then it's less, life threatening in any way, that we're not in step with people. And then what's really cool is that there's this really unique diversity and richness and ways that the uniqueness of all of us can come out and be fully expressed. And that is, like the beauty that I see, in our groups, in our, work, where, and I, travel some, like to see the international group of people that are here, all of the different colors and forms and uniqueness, and different stories that people have. It's like, it's just amazing, right? And then to understand that as a collective too, like any group, like there's a group mind, and a collective kind of being that works together and we get to, create in that way. So, to me, like when we can become and follow our life stream and become our fully individuated selves, right? Then is when we can really come together and make a incredibly rich, reality and culture. And, hopefully we can heal what our difficulties are now, begin to have a vibrant, more realistic culture. So, oops, these questions that he has at the bottom are excellent. So I will just maybe read through them for the recording, and then you guys can take them in and work with them on your own. So what is your aim in life? What is your aim on this path? How far do you wish to go? Do you want to remove a few symptoms? Do you wish total self-realization? The activation of an inner center in which all good, salvation from anxiety, insecurity, and confusion exist? If so, are you willing to pay the price of perseverance, of total commitment? The total commitment brings out your total possibilities. The unlimited potentials of your innermost being enable you to realize unlimited good. So find the exact point where your positive wishes are blocked. Again, our self-will, right? Our positive wishes. And then question what inside you is unwilling to abandon a self-destructive, self-denying attitude. And again, our positive wishes might be, God's will too, right? Our higher self wishes. But, like sometimes, if there's a block, there's usually kind of a divinity and distortion, even if there is a positive, right? So we can explore. And then we want to look at, is there a self-destruction or a self-denying attitude inside that we're unwilling to abandon? And so state clearly that you wish to find it. And once you see it, there is still time to decide whether or not you want to give it up. If you don't want to give it up, find out why not. The insistence upon holding onto something that violates your integrity and your decency holds back the best you have to offer and the best you can be. This impairs your self-respect. It may not be a crass outer manifestation. It may be a hidden little deviation that does not seem to harm anyone, but it always does whether or not you're aware of it. The progress that is vividly experienced by you in its exact proportion to your willingness and openness. This is no mystery about what brings the progress, for the path must work when willingness and openness exist. Those of you who are not satisfied with your progress question themselves deeply and sincerely. Where have I held back? Where did I not want to go all the way? Where have I lost the clarity of the aim? And where have I disconnected the aim from where I am at this moment because I do not want to expose myself? You avoid seeing that you hold back in fear and shame. They are unnecessary obstacles you use to barricade the doors to liberation. So those of you who have progressed and sensed the excitement of a new life to come have much more to look forward to, for you will now fortify your own powers. You will be able to activate them more and more to remove the obstacles of your remaining illusions and to orient yourself to what is eternal within yourself, what is never conflicted or tortured. You will learn to experience it as a living reality. Outer life will follow suit and no friction will accrue. The world will fall into step with you. And that's a part of the life stream, right? And so, okay, thank you, everybody.
Thank you,
Anybody
John.
any final comments or questions?
I think maybe the live stream is the same as being guided by spirit.
Mm-hmm. Holy Spirit. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That flows
It's the
through
perfect
everything,
lecture for
flows through
starting
us,
the
flows
time.
through. Oops, sorry. Try again, Kat.
Yeah. I was just saying, what a perfect lecture for us starting the dying into life. It's wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
Okay, very good, everybody.
Thanks, Darlene.
Yeah.
Nice meeting
you.
you. Nice meeting you, Frank.
Same here.
Bye, Kath. Bye,
Bye-bye.
Wendell.
See you, Judy.
Bye-bye.
Bye. See you, Jacob.